I don't regret killing my mother. And as evil as that may sound, that's my reality. First, I asked Tommy Schaefer to help me find somebody to kill my mom for $50,000. And he said no.
But instead of stopping there, something much worse started to take shape. Something darker, something colder, something that was going to happen thousands of miles away from home. She wanted her mother gone, not because she was angry in the moment, not because they had just gotten into a fight, but because she had planned it that way. In August of 2014, Heather Mack and her mother, Sheila von Wiese, got on a plane headed to Bali. For Sheila, this was supposed to be a chance for them to heal their relationship. For Heather, this was the final step of a plan she'd already been working on. Just a few days later, someone found a suitcase that had been left outside a fancy hotel, and when the Bali police opened it up, what they saw inside would shake the entire world. Now, before we get into this story, I want to take a moment to send our deepest sympathies to the family and loved ones of Sheila von Wiese, who lost her life in the terrible events we're about to talk about. Heather Mack had everything at least on paper. She grew up in Oak Park, one of Chicago's wealthiest suburbs, where historic homes lined quiet streets and opportunities seemed endless. Her father, James L. Mack, was a respected jazz composer and producer known in Chicago's music scene. He was older when Heather was born, but deeply devoted to her. For the first decade of her life, Heather was the center of her parents' world. That changed in 2006 when James died suddenly while the family was on vacation in Greece. He was 77, and his passing left Sheila and 10-year-old Heather on their own. Sheila, a woman accustomed to Chicago's cultural and political circles, suddenly had to play the role of both parent and protector. She poured her energy into keeping Heather close, trying to fill the absence left by her father. But the loss created a shift. For Heather, it meant more than grief, it meant freedom without boundaries. As the years went on, her temper became harder to control. Family friends described outbursts that escalated into violence. Police were called to their home over 80 times across a decade, but Sheila never pressed charges. Each time, she forgave. Each time, she hoped love would be enough to soften her daughter's anger. Despite the privilege around her private schools, international trips, and access to her father's estate, Heather rejected structure. She clashed with teachers. She skipped classes. She took her mother's credit cards to check herself into hotels. Neighbors whispered about the tension spilling out of the house, but Sheila held on to the hope that Heather's rebellion was temporary. To Sheila, Heather was still her only child. To Heather, Sheila was becoming an obstacle. And then Heather met Tommy Schaefer. Tommy was older, ambitious, but unfocused, and quick to cast himself as an outsider. For Heather, he represented escape. The relationship was turbulent from the beginning, but it gave her something she thought she had been missing: loyalty without limits. What Sheila saw as a dangerous influence, Heather saw as freedom. And once she chose Tommy, the fragile bond between mother and daughter began to unravel completely. Heather's father, James L. Mack, had been her anchor. His sudden death while the family was on vacation in Greece in 2006 didn't just leave Heather grieving, it altered the family's future. In his will, James left the bulk of his estate, including access to future settlement money, to Heather. Sheila was excluded almost entirely. For a child of 10, it meant little at first. But as Heather grew older, she began to see that inheritance as her escape. By 2011, that inheritance swelled even further when James's earlier lawsuit against Royal Caribbean was settled for $1.5 million. A portion went to Sheila, but the majority was Heather's. Control over that money became one of the deepest fractures in their relationship. Sheila didn't believe her teenage daughter was ready for such responsibility. Heather believed Sheila was trying to control her by keeping it out of reach. The combination of loss, wealth, and control turned their relationship toxic. And when Tommy Schaefer entered the picture, it was like gasoline poured on an open flame. Heather and Tommy's relationship was volatile from the start. Sheila didn't approve of Tommy's lack of direction, his reputation, or his growing influence over her daughter. Arguments in the household became more explosive. When Heather revealed she was pregnant, everything came to a head. Sheila threatened to cut her off financially, even disinherit her. She also pressured Heather to consider another abortion. To Heather, this felt like betrayal layered on top of years of control. To Sheila, it was a desperate attempt to protect her daughter from making choices she couldn't undo. Meanwhile, Tommy began talking with friends and even family members online about solving their problems. Prosecutors later revealed how these comments, some casual, some chilling, hinted at violence. At the same time, Heather's text showed she was growing more desperate. The couple's conversations weren't about if anymore, but how. The Bali trip in August 2014 was framed by Sheila as a chance to heal their relationship. A luxury vacation at the St. Regis Resort, a chance to reset mother and daughter. But to Heather and Tommy, it was a perfect opportunity. They believed a faraway setting with no watchful family or friends gave them the cover they needed. To outsiders, it looked like a reconciliation getaway. But under the sunlit palm trees of Bali, a plan was already set in motion. Sheila had no idea she was walking into a trap. By the time Heather and Sheila boarded their first-class flight to Bali, the conspiracy was already well underway. Sheila believed she was taking her daughter on a healing trip. What she didn't realize was that Heather had quietly transformed this vacation into the staging ground for a murder. Tommy Schaefer, Heather's boyfriend, flew separately. His ticket was booked with Sheila's own credit card, without her knowledge. When he landed on August 12th, he wasn't greeted with open arms. Sheila was livid when she discovered he had arrived. To her, this was supposed to be mother-daughter time. To Heather, it was cover for a plan. Behind the scenes, Heather had sent Tommy $1,000 for his expenses. She had also secured him a separate room, not at the St. Regis, where she stayed with her mother, but at the Legend Hotel nearby. It was a logistical move, one that let him stay close without arousing suspicion. Digital records later pieced together by investigators revealed just how deliberate everything was. In the weeks before Bali, Heather and Tommy exchanged over 1,000 text messages. Not about reconciliation, not about romance, but about killing Sheila. They debated methods. Heather floated the idea of using sleeping pills or poison. Tommy leaned towards something more direct. Their conversations showed hesitation, but also an eerie persistence. Whenever Tommy wavered, Heather pushed harder. "You said you were going to do this." Later in court, prosecutors revealed that Heather had even approached others back in Chicago, sounding out the idea of hiring someone to kill her mother. No one took her seriously, except Tommy. On August 11th, the day before the murder, Heather slipped Tommy into the St. Regis using her mother's booking details. He stayed hidden, moving cautiously through hallways, waiting for his moment. The plan had shifted multiple times from drugs to strangulation to blunt force, but there was no turning back. They were beyond hesitation. What neither Heather nor Tommy knew was that their secrecy was already compromised. Hotel security cameras had captured Tommy's arrival, every movement through the corridors, every exchange, every shadow passing by the polished lobby floors. All of it was preserved. Footage that would soon dismantle the story they thought they could control. The pieces were in place. The next day, Paradise would turn into a crime scene. August 12th, 2014. The island of Bali carried its usual rhythm waves crashing in the distance, humid air pressing against the walls of the street. Regis Resort, and tourists enjoying a night in paradise. But inside one suite, Paradise was crumbling. That evening, tensions boiled over once again. Sheila and Heather clashed the argument, circling the same issue as before, Tommy. Sheila had been clear. She didn't want him here, not on this trip, not in her life. But Heather, defiant, refused to send him away. For Sheila, this was yet another reminder of how far her daughter had drifted. For Heather, it was one more push toward a choice she had already made. At some point during the night, Tommy entered Sheila's room. Court documents later pieced together what happened next. Sheila was sitting on the edge of the bed, still in the middle of an argument with her daughter, when Tommy struck, the weapon a heavy fruit bowl taken from the hotel minibar. The blow was sudden, shocking, and devastating. Accounts vary on Heather's exact role in those moments. Some reports suggest she may have helped after the fact. Others claim she was in the bathroom while the fatal blows were delivered. What is certain is that Sheila, a 62-year-old mother who had once flown her daughter across the world in hopes of reconciliation, was gone. Her body was wrapped hastily in a hotel bedsheet. Together, Heather and Tommy forced her into a hard-shell suitcase, contorting her frame until it closed. It was an unthinkable image, a human life reduced to luggage, but the cover-up was sloppy. Surveillance cameras documented almost every step. The pair wheeled the suitcase down pristine hallways, across marble floors, and into the hotel lobby. The footage showed no panic, no rush, only cold determination. They loaded the suitcase into the trunk of a waiting taxi, but instead of leaving, they hesitated. Claiming they needed to grab something from the room, Heather and Tommy re-entered the hotel. They never came back to the cab. For hours, the driver waited. The suitcase sat in his trunk. Eventually, the foul smell, coupled with the suspicious behavior of the passengers who never returned, led him to alert hotel security. When the suitcase was finally unzipped, the reality spilled out. Sheila von Wiese-Mack's body was folded unnaturally inside. The discovery sent shockwaves through the luxury resort. A place known for exclusivity and beauty was suddenly a crime scene. Authorities quickly secured the area. The international press caught wind almost immediately. A mother dead, her body found in a suitcase, her daughter and the daughter's boyfriend missing. But Heather and Tommy didn't get far. Within hours, they were found at a budget motel not far from the street Regis. While the world reeled from the horror of the suitcase, the two sat calmly, eating breakfast. The illusion of control was over. The conspiracy, the cover-up, the pretense of normalcy, all shattered with one discovery. Bali's paradise had been pierced, and a case that would make global headlines was only just beginning to unfold. As the sun rose over Bali on August 13, 2014, the crime scene had already begun unraveling. The taxi driver, disturbed by the foul smell and unnerved that his passengers had never returned, contacted hotel security. They opened the abandoned suitcase in his trunk. Inside was the body of Sheila von Wiese-Mack. Her limbs had been forced into an unnatural position to fit. Wrapped in a bloodied hotel sheet, panic spread through the upscale resort. Within hours, Indonesian police began reviewing hotel surveillance footage. They saw Tommy Schaefer and Heather Mack cool, composed, rolling the suitcase down the hallway, loading it into the cab, and then turning around as if nothing happened. The investigation moved quickly. The street Regis staff confirmed Heather had added Tommy to her room using her mother's credentials. That was their first lead. Their second came just hours later. Authorities tracked them down to a nearby budget motel in Kuta, about 6 miles away. There, Heather and Tommy were found sitting calmly, eating breakfast in the open-air cafe. They didn't run. They didn't resist. Police detained them on the spot. At first, Heather claimed she didn't know where her mother was. She said they had argued and Sheila had stormed off on her own. Tommy kept quiet, but it didn't take long for their stories to crumble. Inside the street Regis suite, forensic investigators found bloodstains, signs of a struggle, and missing items that matched those found with the body. It was enough for police to formally place them under arrest. Heather's pregnancy stunned everyone involved, police, media, and even her legal team. It became a central element in the trial that followed. As the case entered the courtroom in Denpasar, Bali, the world watched. The prosecution laid out a clear, methodical timeline built on phone records, security footage, and digital forensics. They revealed how Heather and Tommy had conspired for weeks, if not months, to kill Sheila. The alleged motive, a toxic cocktail of resentment, rebellion, and inheritance. Heather had long harbored anger toward her mother. Tommy, pushed to the edge after a heated altercation with Sheila in a Chicago hotel the year before, had finally crossed the line. But in court, Heather and Tommy told a different version. Tommy claimed he had acted alone, that he had snapped after Sheila insulted him and threatened to have the baby taken away. He said he struck her with a metal fruit bowl in a moment of rage. Heather backed this story. She denied any prior planning or involvement in the actual murder, but the digital trail told a different story. Hundreds of messages were shown to the court, some joking, some coldly logistical about how and when to kill Sheila. The evidence was damning. Still, Indonesian law is complex, and Heather's pregnancy brought unexpected protection. Unlike in the U.S., where life imprisonment or even the death penalty might have been considered, Indonesian courts often show leniency toward pregnant women. In April 2015, Tommy Schaefer was sentenced to 18 years in prison. He had admitted to the killing. Heather Mack received a 10-year sentence, a surprisingly light punishment considering the gravity of the crime. She gave birth to her daughter, Stella, inside Karabokan Prison, one of the most overcrowded and harsh correctional facilities in Southeast Asia. Photos surfaced of Heather cradling her baby in a concrete cell, smiling. For some, it was disturbing. For others, it complicated the image of her as a cold-blooded accomplice. Back in the U.S., outrage simmered. Many believed the justice system had failed, that Heather's sentence did not reflect the cruelty of the crime, that she had gotten away with murder. But in Bali, the case was considered closed. Heather would serve her sentence under relatively humane conditions, with access to family visits and the ability to raise her daughter for the early years. Still, whispers continued, some speculated that Heather manipulated the system by getting pregnant. Others pointed to the calculated nature of the crime, the planning, the cleanup, the coldness. Even behind bars, Heather remained a source of fascination for the media. Tabloid headlines followed her every move, and although she disappeared from the spotlight for a while, her story was far from over. Because one day she would return to American soil, and justice, as it turned out, wasn't quite finished with her. Heather Mack and Tommy Schaefer stood trial in Indonesia in 2015. Their court proceedings were public and highly scrutinized, not just because of the brutal nature of the crime, but because of who they were. Heather was the daughter of a wealthy socialite and a famed composer. Tommy, a young, aspiring rapper from Chicago. Their love story had become a tabloid nightmare. The trial unfolded in a Denpasar courtroom, with the prosecution laying out a chilling timeline of events. From the moment the couple flew to Bali to the final minutes inside that luxury hotel suite, and the disturbing aftermath that ended with a battered body stuffed into a suitcase. Prosecutors argued the crime was premeditated, citing text messages, CCTV footage, and Heather's attempt to check the suitcase containing her mother's corpse. Heather and Tommy sat just feet apart throughout the trial, but showed little warmth toward each other. At times, they looked more like co-defendants than a couple. In her defense, Heather claimed that Tommy killed her mother to protect her and that she had no prior knowledge of his plan. Tommy, meanwhile, claimed Heather had pressured him into it, but it became clear that both had played pivotal roles. When the verdict came, the court sentenced Tommy Schaefer to 18 years in prison for murder. Heather Mack, then just 19, was sentenced to 10 years for being an accessory. She was allowed to keep custody of her infant daughter, Stella, whom she gave birth to during her time in prison. The Indonesian justice system, unlike many Western ones, allowed Heather to raise her child in prison until the child reached the age of 6. But the story didn't end in Bali. Thousands of miles away in the United States, another player was about to face justice. Robert Bibbs, Tommy's cousin. Bibbs had never set foot in Bali, but investigators found damning digital evidence that tied him to the planning phase of the murder. Court documents revealed that Bibbs had exchanged messages with Tommy before the trip, coaching him on how to kill Sheila von Wiese and get away with it. He even encouraged Tommy to go through with the plan in exchange for a cut of Heather's potential inheritance, a sum reportedly worth millions. In a disturbing example of long-distance conspiracy, Bibbs had given Tommy detailed advice on how to carry out the murder, how to avoid cameras, and how to cover his tracks. Texts recovered by the FBI showed that Bibbs discussed the murder as if it were a business transaction devoid of empathy or hesitation. In 2016, Bibbs was arrested and charged with conspiracy to commit foreign murder of a U.S. national, a rare and serious federal offense. In court, he pleaded guilty, admitting that he had helped plan the murder, knowing exactly what Tommy intended to do. He expressed remorse during sentencing, but the damage had been done. He was sentenced to 9 years in federal prison, a harsh penalty for someone who never left U.S. soil, but one that sent a message. Helping plan a murder overseas does not shield you from justice back home. Meanwhile, Heather's time in the Carabocan prison passed quietly. Her daughter Stella grew up behind bars, a strange, confined childhood, surrounded by walls, gates, and uniformed guards. In 2021, 6 years into her sentence, Heather was released early for good behavior. She left the prison in silence, carrying little more than a backpack. Her daughter had already been placed in foster care after reaching the age limit, but Heather wasn't free for long. Upon arriving back in the United States, she was immediately arrested by federal agents at O'Hare Airport in Chicago. The U.S. had been building its own case not for the act of murder itself, which had been adjudicated in Indonesia, but for conspiracy to commit murder, obstruction of justice, and additional federal offenses linked to the planning and cover-up. Heather now faced a second round of legal consequences, this time under U.S. jurisdiction with no sympathetic judges or good behavior clauses. This was a deeper reckoning not just for what happened in Bali, but for everything that led up to it, and everyone who played a part in the web of betrayal, money, and murder. Even after convictions were handed down in both Indonesia and the United States, the Heather Mack case continued to raise unsettling questions that neither courtroom could fully answer. In interviews years later, Heather gave several contradictory accounts of what really happened in Bali. In one version, she claimed the murder wasn't premeditated. In another, she said she only found out her mother was dead after walking into the bathroom and seeing the blood. But digital evidence, including text messages exchanged before and during the trip, painted a very different picture, one of careful planning, financial motive, and emotional manipulation. Public reaction to her statements was swift. Many viewed her post-prison interviews as self-serving, an attempt to regain control of the narrative. Others saw a young woman still stuck in the cycle of dysfunction and denial that began long before the suitcase was zipped shut. Each interview only seemed to further erode her credibility. She alternated between painting herself as a victim and admitting some level of complicity, all while maintaining a calm, detached tone. Critics noted how little emotion she showed when speaking about her mother's final moments. And while Tommy Schaefer's role as the person who physically carried out the murder was never in doubt, his own version of events shifted as well. In one account, he described being provoked, even claiming that Sheila had attacked him first. But investigators and prosecutors never found physical evidence to support that claim. The autopsy and surveillance footage painted a picture of a premeditated ambush, not a heat-of-the-moment scuffle. What drives a young woman born into privilege, raised in wealth, and surrounded by opportunity to orchestrate her own mother's murder? Psychologists who reviewed the case cited deep-seated resentment, emotional instability, and a need for control. Heather's childhood was marked by emotional volatility, family dysfunction, and a sense of isolation. Some experts suggested she saw her inheritance as her only ticket to independence, not just financial, but emotional. Tommy, on the other hand, was described as impressionable and easily manipulated. His attachment to Heather appeared obsessive, and some psychologists believed he was driven by a desire to protect and provide, even if it meant crossing moral boundaries. Then there was Robert Bibbs. His involvement revealed how detached some individuals can become when greed overtakes conscience. To him, Sheila wasn't a mother or a human being, just an obstacle to a payday. For the von Wiese-Mack family, the damage went far beyond the loss of Sheila. The trial had pulled private grief into the spotlight, turning a once-respected family into tabloid fodder. Friends described the tragedy as a Greek-level family collapse, one that left no winners, only echoes of betrayal and loss. Even Sheila's friends, many of whom had urged her to stay close to Heather despite years of conflict, were left questioning whether they had encouraged reconciliation at the cost of her life. Several unanswered questions still surround the case. Why did Heather return to the U.S. despite knowing she'd likely face federal charges? Was it naivete or something more calculated? Why did Bibbs think he could coach a murder via text message and walk away unscathed? And what was the final conversation between Heather and her mother really like the one that took place just minutes before Tommy walked in? The Heather Mack case remains one of the most chilling modern examples of familial betrayal and calculated violence. It wasn't just a murder. It was a slow-motion collapse of trust, unraveling across borders, digital trails, and generations. Heather Mack is currently serving time in a U.S. federal prison, convicted of conspiring to kill her mother in a foreign country. After completing her sentence in Indonesia, she was deported to the U.S. in 2021 and promptly arrested by the FBI. She pled guilty in 2023 and was sentenced to 26 years in prison. Tommy Schaefer remains incarcerated in Indonesia, serving an 18-year sentence. His appeals have all been denied. He spends his days in Kirabokan prison, a facility infamous for overcrowding and harsh conditions. Whether he will ever be extradited or face further charges in the U.S. is unclear. Robert Bibbs, the man who allegedly coached the murder from afar via text, was sentenced to 9 years in federal prison in 2017. His involvement, while physically distant, added a disturbing layer to the case. He profited nothing, yet encouraged everything. And then there's Stella, the daughter Heather had, while incarcerated in Bali. For the early part of her life, she lived inside prison walls. She has since been placed in the care of a court-appointed guardian in the U.S., her life forever marked by a crime she had no part in. The Heather Mack case is not just a story about greed, violence, or betrayal. It's about the cost of unresolved trauma, the dangers of ignoring red flags, and the failure of privilege to protect people from themselves. It's a reminder that even in families that look picture perfect on the outside, with luxury vacations, high society events, and generational wealth, cracks can form quietly beneath the surface. And sometimes, those cracks become chasms. It's about manipulation, control, and how easily love can be twisted into leverage. It's about the moments that build up to something unthinkable, moments that often go unnoticed until it's far too late. We cover true crime stories like this every week, where family secrets, psychological dissent, and chilling consequences collide. If you found this breakdown gripping and disturbing, consider subscribing to the channel. Your support helps us bring real stories to light with the sensitivity, research, and depth they deserve. What do you think was the real motive behind Heather's decisions? Leave your thoughts, theories, or respectful questions in the comments below. And don't forget to turn on notifications. Our next case is one you won't want to miss.